The rain hammered against Marcus Thompson's windshield as he drove through the industrial district of Phoenix at 11:30 p.m. His 12-year-old son, Jake, was asleep in the passenger seat, clutching his baseball glove after another late practice. Marcus squinted through the downpour, his mind already calculating tomorrow's expenses, rent, groceries, Jake's upcoming school trip he couldn't afford. That's when he saw her. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. A woman in an expensive-looking coat stood beside a cherry-red 1967 Mustang fastback, its hood propped open, steam rising into the night air. She was frantically waving her phone, clearly getting no signal in this dead zone between warehouses. Marcus had driven past dozens of stranded motorists over the years, always wanting to help but never having the time or resources. Tonight felt different. He pulled over. Marcus rolled down his window as he approached the stranded vehicle. The woman looked up, her dark hair plastered to her face by the rain. Even in the dim streetlight, he could see the frustration etched across her features. "Car trouble?" Marcus called out, stating the obvious, but trying to break the ice. "Engine. Overheated about 20 minutes ago," she replied, her voice carrying a slight accent he couldn't place. "I've been trying to get a signal to call for help, but nothing's working out here." Marcus parked his old Toyota Camry and grabbed his emergency kit from the trunk, careful not to wake Jake. The woman watched him approach, her posture tense but grateful. "I'm Marcus," he said, extending his hand. "This is pretty much the dead zone for cell service. Let me take a look under the hood." "Elena Vasquez," she replied, shaking his hand firmly. "I appreciate this, but I should warn you, I don't really know much about cars." Marcus couldn't help but smile at that. "Well, lucky for you, I've been tinkering with engines since I was Jake's age." He nodded toward his car, where his son remained fast asleep. Under the hood, Marcus immediately spotted the problem. The radiator hose had burst, explaining the steam and the puddle of coolant beneath the car. It was a relatively simple fix, but not something that could be done roadside without the right parts. "Your radiator hose gave out," Marcus explained, wiping his hands on an old rag. "The good news is it's fixable. The bad news is you're not driving anywhere tonight without a replacement hose and fresh coolant." Elena's shoulders sagged. "Of course. This day just keeps getting better." She glanced at her watch. Nearly midnight now. "I don't suppose there are any auto parts stores open at this hour." "Not around here," Marcus admitted. "But I've got a garage about 15 minutes from here. It's nothing fancy, just a small shop I rent behind my apartment building, but I keep common parts in stock. I could tow you there and have you fixed up by morning." Elena studied his face in the dim light, clearly weighing her options. Marcus understood her hesitation. Accepting help from a stranger in the middle of the night wasn't exactly the safest. Choice for anyone, let alone a woman alone. "Look," Marcus said, sensing her uncertainty, "I get it if you'd rather wait for AAA or call someone else. But I'm a single dad trying to make an honest living, and I can't just leave you stranded out. Here, it's not safe." Something in his tone seemed to convince her. "You said you have a garage?" "Small operation. I mostly do repairs for neighbors and friends, but I know my way around classic cars. Had a '65 Mustang myself once upon a time." He didn't. Mentioned that he'd sold it 3 years ago when Jake needed surgery for a broken arm, and the insurance didn't cover everything. Elena nodded slowly. "Okay, I appreciate the help, Marcus, really." Getting the Mustang to Marcus's garage proved more complicated than expected. His Toyota wasn't equipped for towing, so they had to get creative. Marcus used his emergency kit's jumper cables and some rope to create a makeshift tow setup, with Elena steering the Mustang while he pulled it slowly through the empty streets. Jake woke up during the process, rubbing his eyes and asking sleepy questions about why they weren't going home. Marcus explained they were helping someone and His son accepted this without complaint. It wasn't the first time his father had stopped to help a stranger. "Is that a real Mustang?" Jake asked, suddenly more alert as they pulled into the narrow alley behind their apartment building. "It sure is, buddy. A fastback, too. They don't make them like this anymore." Elena overheard this exchange as she stepped out of her car. "You know your Mustangs?" she said to Jake with a genuine smile. "Dad taught me," Jake replied proudly. "He says every car has a story." "That's very wise," Elena said, then turned to Marcus. "This is your garage." Marcus felt a flush of embarrassment as he looked at his setup through Elena's eyes. It was basically a converted storage unit behind a run-down apartment complex. He had workbenches made from salvaged materials, tools organized in coffee cans, and old toolboxes, and a collection of used parts stacked on metal shelving units. The concrete floor was stained with years of oil and grease, despite his efforts to keep it clean. "It's not much," he admitted, unlocking the roll-up door, "but it gets the job done." Elena walked around the space, her eyes taking in details Marcus hadn't even noticed anymore. She paused at his workbench, where he'd been rebuilding a carburetor for his neighbor's truck. Her fingers traced the edge of a faded photograph taped to the wall, Marcus and a younger Jake standing beside his old Mustang at a car show. "You sold it?" she asked quietly. Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to explain. "Why? Sometimes you do what you have to do." Jake had found a folding chair in the corner and was fighting to stay awake, his head nodding as exhaustion overtook his curiosity about the midnight adventure. "Let me get him settled," Marcus said, lifting his son and carrying him to the small office area he'd set up in the back corner. It had a couch where Jake could sleep while Marcus worked on weekend projects. When he returned, Eleanor was examining the Mustang's engine bay more closely, her expensive coat now draped over a nearby stool. The burst hose caused some overheating. "Damage," Marcus explained, pulling his work light closer. "Nothing catastrophic, but I'll need to flush the cooling system and check the thermostat. With the right parts, I can have you back on the road by tomorrow afternoon." "What's something like this going to cost?" Elena asked. Marcus mentally calculated parts and labor, then knocked off his usual markup, because she was stranded and it was the middle of the night. "Parts will run about $60. Labor—" He paused, looking at the high-end coat, the expensive car, the designer purse she carried. "Another $40 should cover it." Elena raised an eyebrow. $100? That's it? "It's honest work." "For honest pay," Marcus replied, already pulling the necessary tools from his collection. "I'm not looking to take advantage of anyone." As Marcus worked, Elena surprised him by asking intelligent questions about the repair process. She might not know much about cars, but she was clearly observant and quick to learn. She even held the work light for him when he needed to see into tight spaces. "You said you do this part-time," she asked as Marcus carefully removed the damaged hose. "Evenings and weekends mostly. I work construction during the day, when there's work available." He didn't mention that construction jobs had been scarce lately, or that this garage was becoming more essential to keeping food on the table. "And Jake's mother?" Marcus paused in his work. It wasn't a question he got often, and he wasn't sure how to answer. "It's just been me and him for about 5 years now. She decided being a mom wasn't what she wanted." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Jake's the best thing that ever happened to me. We do okay." Elena watched him work for a while in comfortable silence. Marcus found himself stealing glances at her, trying to figure out her story. The car was clearly expensive, professionally maintained. Her clothes spoke of money, but she wasn't acting entitled or impatient like some wealthy customers he'd encountered. "What brings you to this part of Phoenix at midnight?" Marcus asked, as he installed the new radiator hose. Elena hesitated before answering. "Business meeting ran late. I was taking the scenic route back to my hotel and decided to see how the old girl handled the open road. Guess I pushed her a little too hard. First rule of classic cars: they'll run forever if you treat them right, but they'll let you know real quick if you don't. Sounds like wisdom that applies to more than just cars. Marcus found himself smiling at that. There was something about Elena that put him at ease, despite the unusual circumstances of their meeting. She wasn't just another customer passing through. She seemed genuinely interested in what he was doing and why he was doing it. As he worked, Marcus found himself explaining more than he usually would. He told her about learning mechanics from his grandfather, about the satisfaction of bringing something broken back to life, about the small victories that came with each successful repair. "You really love this," Elena observed. "I guess I do. There's something honest about mechanical work. A car either runs or it doesn't. You can't fake your way through it or talk your way around it. Either you fix the problem or you don't." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "That's refreshing," Elena said quietly. "You'd be surprised how many people in my line of work have forgotten that basic principle." Marcus was about to ask what her line of work was when Jake stirred on the couch, mumbling something about baseball practice. Elena glanced over at the sleeping boy, her expression softening. "He's lucky to have you," she said. "I'm the lucky one. It keeps me grounded, reminds me what's really important." Marcus finished installing the new thermostat and began refilling the cooling system. The work was nearly complete, but he found himself working slower than usual, not quite ready for this unexpected encounter to end. "Marcus," Elena said as he was cleaning up his tools, "can I ask you something?" "Sure." "What would you do if money wasn't an issue? If you could do anything with your life, what would it be?" The question caught him off guard. It had been so long since anyone had asked him about dreams rather than immediate needs. "I'd probably expand this place," he said after a moment. "Turn it into a real restoration shop. There are so many classic cars sitting in garages and junkyards, just waiting for someone to care enough to bring them back to life. I'd love to. Specialize in Mustangs, maybe Camaros and Chevelles too. Build a reputation for quality work. Teach Jake the business if he's interested." "What's stopping you?" Marcus gestured around the converted storage unit. "Reality. Equipment costs money. Good tools cost more money. A real shop with proper ventilation and hydraulic lifts and diagnostic equipment. That's tens of thousands of dollars I don't have." Elena nodded thoughtfully. "But you'd be good at it. The restoration business. I think so. I've got the skills, and I care about the work. But caring doesn't pay the bills." As if summoned by the mention of bills, Jake woke up and wandered over to where they were working, still half asleep. "Is the car fixed, Dad?" "Just about, buddy. Why don't you grab your stuff and get ready to head home? It's way past your bedtime." Elena watched the interaction between father and son with interest. There was clearly a strong bond there, built on mutual respect and genuine affection. "Thank you for helping the lady, Dad," Jake said seriously, extending his hand to Elena. "I'm Jake Thompson." "Elena Vasquez," she replied, shaking his small hand with the same formality she'd shown his father. "Thank you for sharing your dad with me tonight. He's quite a mechanic." Jake beamed with pride. "He's the best. He taught me how to change oil and check tire pressure and everything." "That's very impressive. Maybe someday you'll be as good as he is. Maybe better," Jake said with the confidence only a 12-year-old could muster. Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest as he watched his son interact with Elena. Jake was growing up fast, and moments like these reminded Marcus how much his boy was missing without a mother figure in his life. Not that Marcus was looking for someone to fill that role. His focus had to be on providing stability and security for Jake, not on his own loneliness. The Mustang's engine turned over smoothly on the first try, the cooling system functioning perfectly. Marcus let it run for a few minutes to ensure everything was working properly before giving Eleanor the all-clear. "She sounds good as new," he said, closing the hood. "The cooling system is completely flushed, new hose and thermostat installed. Just remember to check your coolant levels regularly and don't push her too hard on hot days." Elena reached for her purse and pulled out her wallet. $100, right? That's right. She handed him 5 $20 bills, then surprised him by adding another 100 on top of it. "That's too much," Marcus protested. "It's past midnight, you've got your son with you, and you could have just driven past me. The extra is for the inconvenience and for Jake's college fund." Marcus wanted to refuse, but the practical part of his mind quickly calculated what that extra 100 could cover. Groceries for 2 weeks, or Jake's school trip, or a small cushion against the next unexpected expense. "Thank you," he said simply. "That's very generous." Eleanor smiled. "Thank you for restoring my faith in decent people. It's been a long time since someone helped me without wanting something in return." As she prepared to leave, Eleanor paused at the garage entrance. "Marcus, can I give you some advice?" "Sure." "Don't let anyone convince you that what you do here isn't important. The world needs more people like you, people who take pride in their work and care about doing things right." With that, she climbed into the Mustang and drove off into the night, leaving Marcus and Jake standing in the doorway of their small garage, watching the taillights disappear around the corner. "She was nice," Jake said as they locked up and headed home. "Yeah, she was," Marcus agreed. But his mind was already moving on to tomorrow's challenges. A construction job that might or might not materialize, bills that definitely would need paying, and the constant balancing act of single parenthood. Neither father nor son imagined they would see Elena Vasquez again. 3 weeks passed before Marcus saw Elena again. The memory of that rainy midnight encounter had faded into the background of daily survival. Jake's school conferences, a stretch of steady construction work rebuilding storm-damaged roofs, and weekend garage projects that kept their small income flowing. Marcus was underneath Mrs. Rodriguez's Honda Civic, replacing a worn transmission mount when Jake's excited voice echoed through the garage. "Dad, there's a lady here with 3 cars." Marcus rolled out from under the Honda, wiping grease from his hands. Through the open garage door, he could see a convoy that made his jaw drop. Elena stood beside the lead vehicle, a midnight blue 1969 Dodge Charger RT that gleamed like it had just rolled off a showroom floor. Behind it sat a pristine 1970 Plymouth Cuda in sublime green, and bringing up the rear was a candy apple red 1967 Camaro SS that looked like automotive perfection. "Hello, Marcus," Elena said with that same genuine smile he remembered. She wore jeans and a simple white blouse today, but somehow still carried herself with an elegance that seemed effortless. "Elena?" Marcus stood there, momentarily speechless. "What? How did you find me?" "You're not exactly hard to track down. There's only one Marcus Thompson doing honest mechanical work in this part of Phoenix." She gestured toward the 3 classics. "I was hoping you might have time to take a look at these." Jake had already gravitated toward the Charger, his eyes wide with admiration. "Dad, look at this engine!" Elena had popped the hood, revealing a numbers-matching 446-pack that looked like it belonged in a museum. The engine bay was spotless, every component either restored to original specification or upgraded with period-correct performance parts. 6-pack setup, Marcus observed, moving closer to examine the triple 2-barrel carburetors. "These are getting rare. What's the issue?" "She runs beautifully," Elena admitted, "but there's a slight hesitation during acceleration that my usual mechanic can't seem to diagnose. He's excellent with modern cars, but these classics require a different touch." Marcus listened to the Charger's idle, noting the subtle irregularity that most people would miss. "Sounds like a timing issue, maybe an advance curve in the distributor. Could also be a fuel delivery problem with one of the carbs." "That's what I was hoping you'd say. You drove all 3 of these here just for a diagnosis." Elena's expression grew more serious. Actually, I was hoping to discuss something else. With you, these cars need someone who understands them, respects them. My current restoration team is solid, but they're missing something, which is passion. They treat these like any other job. You treated my Mustang like it mattered. Marcus found himself studying Elena more carefully. The expensive car, the designer clothes from their first meeting, now this collection of perfectly restored muscle cars. Clearly there was more to her story than she'd revealed. Elena, what exactly do you do for a living? She smiled, but there was something almost shy about it. I restore and sell classic American muscle cars, high-end clients, mostly collectors and investors. You mean like a hobby? More like a business, a fairly successful one. Jake had moved on to the CUDA, his baseball cap pushed back as he peered into the engine compartment. Dad, this one has a Hemi. Elena nodded. 426 Street Hemi, one of the rarest engines Plymouth ever built. Marcus whistled low. A car like that could be worth anywhere from 6 figures to well beyond, depending on its provenance and condition. These aren't just classics, Elena. These are investment-grade vehicles, which is why I need someone I can trust to work on them. The implications of what she was suggesting began to sink in. Marcus had worked on valuable cars before, but nothing approaching this level. The responsibility would be enormous. One mistake could cost tens of thousands of dollars. I appreciate the confidence, Marcus said carefully, but I'm not sure my setup here is appropriate for cars of this caliber. They deserve better than a converted storage unit. What if that could change? Before Marcus could ask what she meant, Elena walked over to the Camaro and opened the passenger door. She retrieved a manila folder and brought it back to where he was standing. I've been researching restoration shops in the Southwest, she said, handing him the folder. Phoenix has great weather for this kind of work, lower overhead than California, and a growing community of collectors. But there's a gap in the market. Marcus opened the folder to find architectural drawings, business plans, and financial projections. The papers detailed plans for a state-of-the-art restoration facility with proper paint booths, hydraulic lifts, parts storage, and office space. Elena, what is this? A proposition. Jake had wandered back over, his attention caught by the official-looking documents. Dad, are those blueprints? They are, buddy. Marcus flipped through pages showing equipment lists, staffing plans, and profit projections that made his head spin. Elena, I don't understand. What does this have to do with me? I need a partner, someone who knows these cars inside and out, who cares about quality work, and who has the integrity to handle million-dollar restorations. $1 million? Elena pointed to the CUDA. That car is worth $1.2 million. The Charger is worth $800,000. The Camaro is worth $600,000. And these are just 3 cars from my current inventory. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. He'd been casually examining vehicles worth over $2.5 million, and Jake had been leaning all over them like they were toys. Jake, step away from the cars, he said quickly. Elena laughed. Marcus, relax. They're meant to be appreciated. Jake's not going to hurt anything. But if something happened, insurance exists for a reason. Besides, I've watched you work. You understand these machines. More importantly, you respect them. Marcus sank onto his work stool, trying to process what Elena was telling him. You want me to be your partner in a restoration business? I want to offer you a chance to build something bigger than this. She gestured around the small garage. Don't get me wrong, what you've created here is impressive, but imagine what you could do with proper resources. Jake had picked up one of the architectural drawings and was studying it with the intensity he usually reserved for baseball cards. Dad, look at this lift system. You could work on cars without lying on the ground. I see it, buddy. Elena knelt down beside Jake. What do you think? Would your dad be good at running a place like this? He'd be the best, Jake said without hesitation. He fixes everything. Mrs. Rodriguez says he's a miracle worker. High praise, Elena said seriously. I trust Mrs. Rodriguez's judgment. Marcus looked up sharply. You talked to Mrs. Rodriguez. I talked to several of your customers, unofficially, of course. Everyone says the same thing. You're honest, skilled, and you stand behind your work. Elena stood and faced him directly. Marcus, I didn't come here on impulse. I've been thinking about this for weeks. Why me? You could partner with any established restoration shop. Because established shops already have their own ways of doing things. Most of them prioritize profit over craftsmanship. I need someone who still believes that doing something right is more important than doing it fast. Marcus stood and walked over to the charger, running his hand along the perfect paint job. Even in the harsh fluorescent lighting of his garage, the finish was flawless. What would this partnership look like? Eleanor pulled out another set of documents from the Camaro. I provide the capital, the facility, the initial customer base, and the high-end inventory. You provide the expertise, the quality control, and the day-to-day management. We split profits 60-40. 60-40 in whose favor? Yours. You'd be doing most of the actual work. Marcus stared at her. That doesn't make sense. You're putting up all the money. Money is just a tool, Marcus. I have plenty of tools. What I need is someone who can use them properly. Jake had found a photo in the documents showing the proposed facility's interior. Dad, they have a customer lounge with a coffee machine. And everything. Elena smiled at Jake's enthusiasm, then turned back to Marcus. There's something else. The facility includes living quarters upstairs, a proper apartment with 3 bedrooms, modern kitchen, dedicated study space for Jake. You want us to live there? I want Jake to grow up around this business if he's interested. Some of the greatest mechanics I know learned by watching their fathers work. If he decides he wants to be a baseball player or a doctor or anything else, that's fine too. But he'd have the option. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the scope of what Elena was proposing. It was everything he'd dreamed about during those late nights in his small garage, but the scale was beyond anything he'd imagined possible. Elena, I need to ask you something, and I want a straight answer. Of course. What's your real story? Nobody just shows up offering to bankroll someone else's dream without a compelling reason. Elena was quiet for a long moment, studying the 3 cars lined up in his garage. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before. My grandfather started restoring cars in his garage in 1962. By the time I was born, he had built the largest muscle car restoration business on the West Coast. I grew up in that world, car shows, auctions, shop talk at the dinner table. She paused, running her finger along the Charger's fender. When he died 10 years ago, I inherited everything. The business, the inventory, the reputation he'd spent. 50 years building. I was 28 years old and thought I knew what I was doing. What happened? I tried to modernize everything, make it more efficient, more profitable. I hired MBAs and efficiency experts. I turned my grandfather's passion project into a corporate machine. Eleanor's voice grew bitter. Within 5 years, I'd tripled the revenue and completely destroyed what made the business special. Jake had stopped looking at the blueprints and was listening to Elena's story with the same attention he gave to Marcus's explanations about engines. The craftsmen who had worked for my grandfather started leaving. The customers who had been loyal for decades began taking their business elsewhere. I was making more money than ever, but I was losing everything that mattered. So what did you do? I shut it down, sold the facility, liquidated most of the inventory, kept only the cars that meant something to me personally. She gestured toward the 3 classics. I've spent the last 3 years trying to figure out how to rebuild what I destroyed. Marcus began to understand. And you think I'm the answer? I think you represent what I lost. You care about the work itself, not just the profit margin. You take pride in doing things right, even when no one is watching. That's what my grandfather's business was built on. But why Phoenix? Why not rebuild in California where you have history? Elena smiled sadly. Because California reminds me of my failures. I need a fresh start, and I need someone who hasn't been contaminated by the corporate approach to restoration work. Jake had been unusually quiet during this exchange, but now he spoke up. Miss Elena, are you sad about your grandfather? Very sad, Jake. I disappointed him, even though he never got to see what I did to his business. My dad says you can't change the past, but you can always try to make things better going forward. Elena looked at Jake with surprise, then at Marcus. That's very wise advice. Kid's got a good head on his shoulders, Marcus said proudly. What do you think, Dad? Jake asked. Should we help Miss Elena fix her grandfather's dream? Marcus looked around his small garage at the concrete floors he'd painted himself, the workbenches he'd built from salvaged materials, the tools he'd collected one paycheck at a time. It wasn't much, but it was his. Taking Elena's offer meant giving up that independence, that sense of ownership, but it also meant giving Jake opportunities Marcus could never provide on his own. A real home, financial security, and the chance to learn a trade that could support him for life. Can I think about it? Marcus asked finally. Of course, but I hope you won't take too long. I've already put deposits down on 2 potential locations, and the lease agreements expire next month. Elena gathered up the documents and prepared to leave, but paused at the garage entrance. Marcus, there's one more thing. I know this is a lot to consider, and I know trust doesn't come easy. If you decide to move forward, I want you to have your own lawyer review everything. I want you to feel completely comfortable with the arrangement. That's fair. And if you have any questions, any concerns at all, please call me. She handed him a business card with her personal number. Day or night. After she left, Marcus and Jake stood in the garage, surrounded by the lingering scent of high-octane gasoline and the memory of automotive perfection. Dad, are we really going to have our own restoration shop? I don't know, buddy. It's a big decision, but you want to, right? I can tell. Marcus couldn't deny it. The opportunity Elena was offering represented everything he'd ever wanted professionally, but wanting something and being ready for it were 2 different things. What do you think we should do? He asked his son. Jake considered this seriously. I think Miss Elena needs us, and I think we need her too. Why do you say that? Because you're always worried about money, and she has lots of money. And she's always worried about doing the right thing, and you always do the right thing. Marcus marveled at his son's simple wisdom. Maybe the decision didn't have to be as complicated as he was making it. That night, after Jake was asleep, Marcus sat at their small kitchen table with Elena's business card and the architectural drawings spread out before him. He thought about his grandfather's garage, about Elena's grandfather's legacy, about the dreams he'd set aside to focus on immediate survival. For the first time in years, Marcus allowed himself to imagine a future that extended beyond next month's rent payment. Marcus spent the weekend wrestling with Elena's offer. He'd called his neighbor Tommy Castillo, who worked as a paralegal, to review the partnership documents. Tommy's verdict was encouraging. The contract was surprisingly fair, with built-in protections for both parties and clear exit strategies if things didn't work out. Monday morning brought an unexpected complication. Marcus arrived at the construction site to find his crew supervisor, Rick Morrison, waiting with bad news. Thompson, I hate to do this, but the Henderson project got cancelled. Owners ran into permit issues with the city. Rick avoided eye contact as he continued. I'm going to have to let you go for now. Might have something in a month or 2, but I can't make any promises. Marcus felt his stomach drop. The Henderson renovation was supposed to run through the end of summer, providing steady income for 3 months. Without it, he'd be scrambling to find work in a construction market that was already oversaturated. "What about the West Side Mall project you mentioned?" Marcus asked, trying to keep desperation out of his voice. "Went to Morrison Brothers Construction. They bid lower than we could match." Marcus nodded and gathered his tools, his mind already calculating how long their savings would last. 2 weeks, maybe 3 if he picked up some garage work. Jake's school fees were due in 2 weeks, and their rent wasn't going to wait for the construction market to improve. He drove straight to the garage and called Eleanor. "I'd like to accept your offer," he said without preamble when she answered. There was a pause on the other end. "Marcus, are you sure? You sound stressed." "Lost my construction job this morning. Seems like the universe is making the decision. For me, I'm sorry to hear that, but I don't want you saying yes just because you're backed into a corner. This partnership needs to be something you genuinely want, not just a financial lifeline." Marcus appreciated her concern, but his mind was made up. "Elena, I've wanted to build something like this my whole life. The timing might be driven by necessity, but the desire has been there all along. All right then, can you meet me at the first location this afternoon? I want you to see what we're working with." The address Elena gave him was in an industrial district 15 minutes from his apartment, but worlds away from his converted storage unit. Marcus arrived to find Elena standing outside a 12,000-square-foot building that looked like it had been designed specifically for automotive work. "Former Mercedes dealership," Elena explained as she unlocked the front entrance. "Closed down during the recession and never reopened. The bones are perfect for what we need." Walking through the space was like stepping into Marcus's wildest fantasies. The main floor had 12 service bays with hydraulic lifts, proper ventilation systems, and electrical setups designed for heavy equipment. Adjacent to the work area was a climate-controlled parts warehouse with organized shelving systems that stretched to the ceiling. "The paint booth is in the back," Eleanor said, leading him through the facility. "It's been updated to meet current environmental standards, which saves us about $50,000 in modifications." The paint booth was a revelation. Sealed environment, filtered air systems, and lighting designed to show true colors without distortion. Marcus had always dreamed of having access to equipment like this. "Upstairs?" he asked, remembering her mention of living quarters. The second floor had been the dealership's administrative offices, but Elena's architects had redesigned the space into a comfortable 3-bedroom apartment. Large windows overlooked the shop floor, allowing supervision of work below while maintaining separation between business and personal space. Jake would have his own room for the first time, Elena noted, showing him the smaller bedroom that had been designed with a teenager in mind. Built-in desk, plenty of storage, and space for both study and relaxation. Marcus stood at the window, looking down at the shop floor, imagining himself working on Elena's collection of classics in a proper professional environment. The scope of the opportunity was almost overwhelming. "What's the timeline?" he asked. "Lease starts the 1st of next month. Equipment installation takes about 2 weeks. We could be operational by mid-August." "That fast?" Elena smiled. "I've been planning this for longer than you know. Most of the equipment is already ordered and sitting in a warehouse in Los Angeles. I was just waiting for the right partner." They spent another hour going through the facility, with Elena explaining her vision for workflow, customer service, and business operations. Her approach impressed Marcus. She'd clearly learned from her previous mistakes and was building in safeguards to maintain quality while growing the business. "There's something else I want to show you," Elena said as they prepared to leave. She led him to a separate garage bay that had been set up as a showroom. "These are some of the projects we'd be starting with." Marcus walked among the collection and felt his breath catch. A 1970 Plymouth Cuda in need of complete restoration, Its original vitamin C orange paint faded, but its lines still perfect. A 1968 Shelby GT 500 KR that looked like it had been pulled from a time capsule. A numbers-matching 1967 L88 Corvette that represented the holy grail of Chevrolet collectibles. How many cars are we talking about? 43 vehicles in various stages of restoration. Combined value when completed is approximately $8 million. Marcus did quick math in his head. Even with Elena taking a conservative approach to pricing, his 40% share of the profits would be life-changing money. But more importantly, he'd be working on automotive history, cars that would outlive both of them and carry stories for generations. "I have one condition," Marcus said finally. "Name it. Jake comes to the shop after school and during summers. I want him to learn the business properly, not just watch from the sidelines." "I was hoping you'd say that. Some of the finest craftsmen I know started as shop kids. If he shows aptitude and interest, we'll make sure he gets proper training." They shook hands in the empty dealership, surrounded by the ghost of automotive. Dreams past and the promise of restoration, dreams future. The transition happened faster than Marcus had expected. Elena's efficiency was remarkable. Within a week, she'd handled lease negotiations, utility transfers, and equipment scheduling. Marcus spent his days coordinating with contractors and installers, while Elena managed the business logistics. Jake threw himself into the project with enthusiasm that surprised even Marcus. The boy spent hours studying the architectural drawings, memorizing the locations of different workstations, and planning the most efficient workflow patterns. His baseball practice schedule got reorganized around shop preparation activities. "Dad, look at this," Jake said one evening, showing Marcus a notebook filled with his careful handwriting. "I made a list of all the cars and what work they need. The Shelby needs a complete engine rebuild, but the Corvette just needs paint and interior." Marcus looked through his son's detailed notes, impressed by both Jake's attention to detail and his growing understanding of automotive restoration priorities. "This is really good work, buddy. Where'd you learn to organize information like this?" "Miss Elena showed me how she keeps track of projects. She says good record keeping is just as important as good mechanical work." Elena had indeed taken Jake under her wing, teaching him business concepts while Marcus focused on the technical preparations. She'd shown Jake how to photograph restoration progress, maintain parts inventories, and communicate with customers about project timelines. "She's really smart, Dad," Jake observed, "but she's still sad about her grandfather." "What makes you say that?" "She gets quiet sometimes when she's looking at the old cars, like she's remembering something that makes her happy and sad at the same time." Marcus recognized his son's developing emotional intelligence. Jake had always been perceptive about people's feelings, probably a survival skill developed during the turbulent period when his mother left. The first major test of their partnership came during the second week of preparation. Eleanor arrived at the shop to find Marcus arguing with the paint booth installer about ventilation specifications. "The specs call for a minimum air exchange rate of 24 changes per hour," Marcus was saying, his voice tight with frustration. "What you've installed gives us maybe 18. "Look, buddy," the installer replied dismissively, "this system meets code requirements. You want better ventilation? You're talking about another 15 grand in equipment." Elena stepped into the conversation smoothly. "Excuse me, gentlemen, is there a problem?" Marcus explained the discrepancy while the installer tried to downplay its significance. Elena listened to both sides, then pulled out her phone and made a call. "Dave, it's Elena Vasquez. I need you to run air exchange calculations for a paint booth installation." "Yes, I'll hold." She covered the phone and addressed the installer. "Dave Martinez is the engineer who designed this system. Let's get his opinion." 5 minutes later, Eleanor hung up with a grim expression. "Dave confirms that 18 changes per hour is insufficient for the type of work we'll be doing. He's recommending we upgrade the exhaust fans and add supplemental intake vents. That's going to cost, the installer began. I don't care what it costs, Eleanor cut him off. We're going to do this right the first time. After the installer left to order additional equipment, Eleanor turned to Marcus with an apologetic expression. I should have caught that during the initial planning. Thank you for holding the line on quality standards. It's your money, Marcus replied. I just want to make sure we can deliver the kind of work these cars deserve. That's exactly why this partnership is going to work. I know business, you know the technical requirements. Together we can avoid the mistakes I made before. The paint booth correction added a week to their timeline, but Marcus appreciated Elena's commitment to doing things properly. Too many restoration. Shops cut corners on infrastructure, then struggled to deliver consistent results. During the delay, Marcus used the time to set up his personal work area. Elena had insisted he designate space for his own projects, cars that belonged to neighbors and friends who couldn't afford high-end restoration services. I don't want you to lose touch with your roots, she'd explained. The day we stop caring about Mrs. Rodriguez's Honda is the day we start losing our souls. Marcus created a modest two-bay area separate from the main restoration floor, equipped with basic tools and lifts sufficient for routine maintenance and repair. It wasn't as elaborate as the main facility, but it represented Elena's understanding of what made Marcus tick. Jake had claimed a corner workbench as his personal domain, organizing tools and supplies with military precision. Elena had surprised him with a complete set of mechanics tools sized for younger hands, along with safety equipment and work clothes embroidered with Thompson Restoration logos. I'm going to be the best apprentice you ever had, Dad, Jake declared, trying on his new work coveralls. You're going to be my only apprentice, Marcus replied with a grin. Then I'll definitely be the best. The final equipment delivery coincided with their first customer consultation. Elena had arranged for Marcus to meet with Dr. Patricia Williams, a collector from Scottsdale, who owned a 1969 Boss Mustang 429 in need of complete restoration. Dr. Williams was a retired surgeon with precise expectations and unlimited budget, exactly the kind of customer Elena specialized in serving. She'd owned the Mustang since college, but had never found a shop she trusted with its restoration. I've been waiting 40 years for the right craftsman, Dr. Williams explained, running her hand along the car's original paint. Elena convinced me that you might be worth the wait. Marcus examined the Boss Mustang carefully, noting its rare options and original components that had survived decades of storage. The car was solid, with minimal rust and all numbers matching. A complete frame-off restoration would take 8 months and cost approximately $60,000, but the finished product would be worth twice that amount. What's your timeline expectation? Marcus asked. I'm 73 years old, Dr. Williams replied with a smile. I'd like to drive this car again before I'm too old to enjoy it, but I'd rather wait for quality work than settle for something rushed. Marcus appreciated her perspective. Too many customers wanted everything done yesterday, which inevitably led to compromised results. 8 months for complete restoration, Marcus said. Maybe 7 if everything goes perfectly, but I'd rather under-promise and over-deliver. That's music to my ears. When can you start? Elena handled the contract negotiations while Marcus continued his technical assessment. Watching her work, he gained new appreciation for her business skills. She was thorough without being pushy, professional without being impersonal, and she clearly understood both the technical and emotional aspects of classic car restoration. Our first official project, Elena said after Dr. Williams left. No pressure, Marcus replied, but he was grinning. The Boss Mustang represented everything he loved about restoration work, a rare, historically significant car with an owner who valued quality over speed. Jake had been taking notes during the consultation, his brow furrowed with concentration. as he tried to understand the business aspects of restoration work. "Dad, why does the car cost more to restore than it's worth?" "Actually, buddy, when we're finished, Dr. Williams' car will be worth more than she's paying us. But that's not really why she's doing this." "Then why?" Eleanor answered before Marcus could respond. "Because that car represents her youth, her dreams, her connection to a time when everything seemed possible. We're not just fixing a car, Jake. We're restoring memories." Jake nodded seriously, adding Elena's explanation to his notebook. Marcus realized his son was getting an education that no classroom could provide. Lessons about craftsmanship, business ethics, and the emotional value of meaningful work. That night, as they packed up their tools in the converted storage unit, for the last time, Marcus felt a mixture of nostalgia and anticipation. This small garage had been their refuge during the hardest years, the place where he'd kept his dreams alive while focusing on survival. "Are you sad to leave?" Jake asked, echoing his father's thoughts. "A little. This place saved us when we needed saving, but now we're going to save other people's cars." Marcus smiled at his son's optimism. "That's the plan, buddy. That's definitely the plan. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, higher stakes and greater opportunities. But tonight, Marcus allowed himself to feel proud of how far they'd come and excited about where they were headed. The grand opening of Thompson Vasquez Restoration arrived on a blazing August morning. Marcus stood in the main service bay at 6 a.m., surveying the transformed space one final time before their first official day of operation. 12 classic cars occupied the service bays, each representing months of work and hundreds of thousands of dollars in potential revenue. Jake burst through the side entrance, already dressed in his work coveralls and carrying a thermos of coffee for his father. "Dad, there's a line of cars outside. Must be 20 people waiting." Marcus looked through the front windows to see a convoy of classic car owners who'd heard about their opening through the collector network. Word had spread quickly after Eleanor's carefully orchestrated preview event the previous weekend, where she'd invited select clients to tour the facility and meet Marcus. "Nervous?" Elena asked, appearing beside him with her own cup of coffee and a clipboard full of scheduled appointments. "Terrified," Marcus admitted. "Yesterday we were operating out of a storage unit. Today we're responsible for millions of dollars in automotive history." "You'll be fine. These cars aren't any different than the ones you've been fixing all along. They're just worth more money." Elena's calm confidence helped settle Marcus's nerves. Over the past month, he'd watched her handle every aspect of business operations with the kind of expertise that came from years of experience. She knew how to talk to customers, manage schedules, and coordinate complex projects without losing sight of quality standards. The first customer of the day was Robert Chen, a tech entrepreneur from Tempe, who owned a 1970 Chevelle SS that had been poorly restored in the 1990s. The car looked impressive from a distance, but closer inspection revealed shortcuts and compromises that would need to be corrected. Previous owner had the engine rebuilt, but they used the wrong carburetor, Marcus explained, popping the hood to show Robert the mismatched components. "It runs, but it's not producing anywhere near the power it should." "Can you fix it without starting over completely?" Marcus studied the engine bay, identifying which components could be salvaged and which would need replacement. "We can work with what's here, but it'll take some detective work to source the correct parts. Original Rochester Quadrajet for this application isn't easy to find." "How long are we talking?" 3 months for a proper correction. That includes rebuilding the carburetor, retuning the engine, and addressing some wiring issues I can see from here." Robert nodded approvingly. "Elena said you'd be honest about timelines. My last shop kept promising 2 more weeks for 6 months. Elena handled the paperwork while Marcus continued his assessment. They'd developed an efficient system. Marcus focused on technical evaluation while Elena managed customer relations and scheduling. It was a partnership that played to both their strengths. Jake had positioned himself at a corner workbench where he could observe customer consultations while working on a carburetor rebuild Marcus had assigned him. The boy had proven remarkably adept at detail work, and his natural curiosity made him an excellent student. "Jake, what can you tell me about this carburetor?" Marcus asked during a brief lull between appointments. Jake set down his cleaning brush and pointed to various components. Rochester Quadrajet, probably from a 1969 or 1970 big block application. The accelerator pump diaphragm is torn, which would cause hesitation during acceleration. The float needs adjustment, and the secondary air valves are sticking. Excellent diagnosis. What's the repair priority? Replace the diaphragm first, since that affects drivability. Then adjust the float to prevent flooding. The air valves can be freed up with proper cleaning and lubrication. Eleanor had stopped her paperwork to listen to Jake's technical explanation. "How old are you again?" she asked with amazement. 12, but I'll be 13 next month," Jake replied proudly. "When I was 13, I couldn't even change a tire. You're rebuilding carburetors." Dad's a good teacher. Plus, these old carburetors are way easier to understand than modern fuel injection. The morning continued with a steady stream of consultations. Each potential customer brought unique challenges: a 1967 GTO with frame damage from a long ago accident, a 1969 Roadrunner that needed a complete interior restoration, a 1968 Firebird with an engine swap that needed to be returned to original specifications. Marcus found himself energized by the variety of projects and the technical challenges they represented. This was automotive problem-solving at its highest level, requiring not just mechanical skill, but historical knowledge and detective work to ensure authenticity. Around noon, an unexpected visitor arrived that changed the entire dynamic of their day. A black Bentley pulled up outside, and from it emerged a distinguished man in his 70s, wearing an expensive suit despite the Phoenix heat. "That's Harrison Blackwood," Elena whispered to Marcus, her voice carrying a mix of excitement and nervousness. Marcus recognized the name from automotive magazines. Blackwood was a legendary collector who owned one of the finest assemblies of American muscle cars in the world. His collection had been featured in countless publications, and his stamp of approval could make or break a restoration shop's reputation. "Mr. Blackwood," Elena said, extending her hand as he entered the shop, "this is an unexpected pleasure." "Miss Vasquez, I heard through certain channels that you'd opened a new operation. Thought I'd see what all the fuss was about." Blackwood's eyes swept the facility with the practiced gaze of someone who knew exactly what to look for. He examined the paint booth setup, noted the organization of the parts department, and studied the cars currently in progress. "Impressive facility," he said finally. "But facilities don't restore cars. People do. Which one of you is the craftsman?" Elena gestured toward Marcus. "This is Marcus Thompson, my partner and head of restoration." Blackwood approached Marcus with the bearing of a man accustomed to being the most important person in any room. "Tell me about your background, Mr. Thompson." Marcus felt the weight of scrutiny from one of the hobby's most influential figures. "Grew up working on cars with my grandfather, learned the trade through necessity and passion. I've been doing restoration work for 15 years, focusing on American muscle cars." "Show me something." Marcus led Blackwood to Dr. Williams's Boss Mustang, which was currently disassembled for bodywork. He explained his assessment process, pointing out original components that would be preserved, areas requiring metal replacement, and his plans for maintaining historical accuracy. "You're planning to media blast the entire body?" Blackwood asked, examining the car's undercarriage. "Selective media blasting only where necessary. The rear quarter panels and door frames are solid original metal with surface rust that can be sanded. I only blast when preservation isn't possible." Blackwood nodded approvingly. Too many shops take the easy route and blast everything, destroying original finishes that should be preserved. What about the engine? Marcus walked him through his evaluation of the 429 Cobra jet engine, explaining which components were original and which had been replaced over the years. His approach impressed Blackwood. Thorough documentation, careful preservation of original parts, and commitment to period-correct restoration methods. "Jake, come here," Marcus called to his son, who had been watching the interaction with wide eyes. "Yes, sir? Tell Mr. Blackwood about the Boss 429 engine program." Jake straightened up and began explaining the history of Ford's high-performance engine, its development for NASCAR competition, and the limited production run that made Boss Mustang so valuable today. His knowledge was encyclopedic and his enthusiasm infectious. Blackwood listened with growing interest. "How do you know all this, son?" "My dad taught me, and I read everything I can find about muscle cars. The Boss 429 is special because Ford had to build 500 streetcars to qualify the engine for racing, but they actually built 1,358 in total over 2 years. Very impressive. Your father is teaching you well." After an hour of examination and questioning, Blackwood gathered Marcus and Eleanor in the office area for a private conversation. "I'm going to be direct with you both," he began. "I've been looking for a restoration shop that can handle my most valuable projects. My current team is excellent, but they're backlogged for 2 years, and I have cars that need immediate attention." Elena leaned forward. "What kind of timeline are you considering?" "I have a 1970 Plymouth Cuda convertible, one of 14 built with the 446-pack engine. It was damaged in transport 6 months ago and needs immediate bodywork to prevent further deterioration." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. A Cuda convertible with that engine combination was worth well over $1 million. The responsibility would be enormous, but so would the prestige of working on such a rare vehicle. "What's the extent of the damage?" Marcus asked. "Driver's side rear quarter panel and door, primarily. The impact was significant but localized. The frame is straight and the mechanicals are untouched." "Do you have documentation for the car's provenance?" Blackwood smiled. "Complete ownership, history, original window sticker, dealer invoice, and Chrysler historical records. Everything needed for Concours authentication." Marcus exchanged glances with Elena. This was the kind of project that could establish their reputation in the highest levels of the collector market, but it was also the kind of project that could destroy them if anything went wrong. "I'd need to examine the car personally before committing to a timeline," Marcus said carefully. "Of course, the car is at my warehouse in Scottsdale. When can you look at it?" "Tomorrow morning?" "Excellent. 10 o'clock. Elena has my address." After Blackwood left, the shop fell into thoughtful silence. Jake was the first to speak. "Dad, that car is worth more than most people's houses." "I know, buddy. That's what makes it both exciting and terrifying." Elena had been reviewing notes from their conversation. "Marcus, if we take this project, it changes everything. Harrison Blackwood's endorsement would put us in the top tier of restoration shops overnight, and if we mess it up, then we're finished before we really start." Marcus walked over to Dr. Williams' Mustang, running his hand along the carefully stripped metal. 3 months ago, he'd been worried about paying rent. Now he was being asked to restore one of the rarest muscle cars ever built. "What do you think?" Elena asked. "I think we take the meeting tomorrow and see what we're dealing with. If the damage is within our capabilities, we do it. If it's beyond what we can handle properly, we refer him to someone who can." "That's a very mature approach." Jake had returned to his carburetor work, but was clearly listening to their conversation. "Dad, remember what you always say about taking on projects." "What's that, buddy?" "Only promise what you can deliver, but always deliver more than you promise." Elena smiled at Jake's recitation of his father's philosophy. Wise words from a wise teacher. The remainder of the afternoon brought 3 more consultations. including a potential project involving a 1969 Dodge Daytona that would require extensive research to ensure proper restoration. Each new customer represented both opportunity and responsibility, building toward a future that Marcus was still learning to envision. As they closed the shop that evening, Marcus reflected on how much their lives had changed in just a few months. Jake was thriving in the new environment. Elena had found a partner who shared her commitment to quality, and Marcus was doing work that challenged and fulfilled him in ways he'd never experienced. "Tomorrow we go look at $1 million car," Jake said as they locked up. "Tomorrow we go look at a car that happens to be worth $1 million, Marcus corrected. "But it's still just a car that needs fixing," Elena laughed, spoken like a true craftsman. "Harrison Blackwood is going to love working with you." As they drove home to their new apartment above the shop, Marcus felt cautiously optimistic about their future. The foundation was solid, the opportunities were real, and for the first time in years, he could imagine a path that led beyond survival toward something approaching prosperity. Jake fell asleep in the passenger seat, his notebook of restoration details clutched in his lap. Looking at his son, Marcus realized that the most valuable thing he was building wasn't a business, it was a legacy. Harrison Blackwood's warehouse in Scottsdale was a temple to automotive perfection. Marcus and Elena walked through climate-controlled halls lined with some of the most valuable American muscle cars ever built. Each vehicle sat on specialized lifts, bathed in LED lighting that revealed every curve and detail. "My God," Elena whispered as they passed a pristine 1970 Plymouth Superbird in petty blue. "Some of these cars are worth more than most people make in a lifetime." Jake pressed his nose against the glass of a display case containing original dealer promotional materials and factory documentation. "Dad, look at this stuff. Original window stickers, build sheets, everything." Marcus was equally impressed but tried to maintain professional composure. This collection represented decades of careful acquisition and meticulous preservation. Every car told a story of American automotive innovation at its peak. Blackwood appeared from behind a 1969 Dodge Charger RTSE, wiping his hands on a cloth. Despite his wealth and status, he clearly spent time personally maintaining his collection. "Welcome to my sanctuary," he said with genuine pride. 43 years of collecting, and I still get excited every time I walk in here." "It's incredible," Marcus replied honestly. "I've never seen this level of preservation and presentation. Each car is documented and maintained to concours standards. I don't just collect them, I preserve automotive history for future generations." Blackwood led them deeper into the warehouse, past legendary vehicles that Marcus had only seen in magazines. A 1969 ZL1 Camaro, one of 69 built. A 1970 Chevelle SS LS6, the fastest production muscle car of its era. A collection that represented the absolute pinnacle of American performance. "Here she is," Blackwood said, stopping before a car, covered by a custom-fitted cover. "The reason you're here." He pulled away the cover to reveal a 1970 Plymouth Cuda convertible in violet paint, its damaged rear quarter panel the only flaw in an otherwise perfect presentation. Even with the damage, the car's rarity and significance were immediately apparent. Marcus circled the vehicle slowly, examining the impact damage with a practiced eye. The rear quarter panel was creased and torn, but the damage was surprisingly localized. The door showed minor denting, and the bumper had shifted but appeared salvageable. "The transport company took full responsibility," Blackwood explained. "Their insurance will cover all restoration costs, but I need someone who can return the car to perfect condition." Jake had found the fender tag and was reading off the car's specifications. EV2 in violet, 446-pack convertible, power steering, power brakes, AM/FM radio, rally wheels. "Very good," Blackwood said approvingly. "Most adults can't read fender tags properly." Marcus continued his examination, checking frame alignment and documenting every aspect of the damage. The impact had been significant, but hadn't affected any structural components. Most importantly, all the original metal could be saved through careful repair rather than replacement. This is definitely repairable, Marcus concluded. The quarter panel can be pulled and straightened, the door needs minor metalwork, and the bumper requires rechroming. 4 to 6 months for complete restoration. What about matching the paint? In violet is notoriously difficult to get right. Elena stepped forward. We have access to the original paint codes and can work with Chrysler Historical to ensure perfect color matching. Our paint booth is equipped for show-quality finishes. Blackwood studied their faces, clearly evaluating their confidence and competence. I need to be completely honest with you both. This car means more to me than its monetary value. It was the last car my father and I worked on together before he passed away. We bought it as a restoration project in 1985, but he died before we could start the work. The admission added an emotional dimension that Marcus understood completely. This wasn't just about money or reputation. It was about preserving memories and honoring relationships. I've had opportunities to have it restored over the years, Blackwood continued, but I was never completely confident in any shop's ability to do it justice. Something about your approach yesterday convinced me you might be different. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. This project would be about more than technical excellence. It would require understanding the emotional significance of every detail. Mr. Blackwood, I can't promise perfection, but I can promise that we'll treat your car with the same respect and attention we'd give our own family heirlooms. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. The negotiation that followed was surprisingly straightforward. Blackwood's primary concerns were quality and authenticity rather than cost or timeline. He wanted regular progress updates, detailed documentation of all work performed, and the opportunity to visit the car during restoration. There's one more thing, Blackwood said as they prepared to arrange transport. If you do exceptional work on this project, I have 14 other cars that will need restoration over the next 5 years. Consider this a trial run for a much larger relationship. Elena's eyes widened slightly. 14 more cars from Harrison Blackwood's collection would represent millions of dollars in revenue and establish them as one of the premier restoration shops in the country. We understand the significance, Eleanor replied carefully. You won't be disappointed. The return trip to their shop was filled with excited discussion about the project's implications. Jake peppered his father with technical questions about metalwork techniques, while Elena calculated business projections and scheduling requirements. Dad, this is the biggest project we've ever taken on, isn't it? By far, buddy. But big projects just mean we have to be more careful and thorough than usual. Are you nervous? Marcus considered the question seriously. A little. But I'm more excited than nervous. This is the kind of work I've dreamed about. Doing my whole life. Eleanor had been unusually quiet during the drive, but as they pulled into their shop, she finally spoke. Marcus, there's something I need to tell you about Harrison Blackwood. What's that? He destroyed my grandfather's reputation. Marcus felt his stomach drop. What do you mean? Elena parked and turned to face him. 30 years ago, Blackwood commissioned my grandfather to restore a 1969 Boss 429 Mustang. It was supposed to be a 6-month project, but my grandfather was battling cancer, and the work took almost 2 years. What happened? Blackwood was furious about the delay. He pulled the car, refused to pay for work completed, and spread word through the collector community that my grandfather was unreliable. It damaged our reputation for years. Marcus stared at her in disbelief. And you didn't think to mention this before we agreed to take his project? Because I wanted you to make the decision based on the work, not on old grudges. My grandfather's illness wasn't Blackwood's fault, and his anger about the delay was understandable. Jake had been listening to this exchange with growing concern. "Miss Elena, are you trying to get revenge?" Elena's expression softened. "No, Jake. I'm trying to prove that we can succeed where my grandfather struggled. Sometimes the best response to criticism is excellence." Marcus appreciated Elena's honesty, but the revelation added another layer of pressure to an already challenging project. They would be working not just to restore a car, but to rehabilitate a reputation that had been damaged decades earlier. "Does this change your mind about the project?" Elena asked. Marcus considered carefully. The Blackwood history explained Elena's nervousness during their initial meeting and her determination to win this particular customer's approval. It also meant they couldn't afford even the smallest mistake. Blackwood would be watching for any sign of the problems he'd experienced with Elena's grandfather. "It makes the project more important, not less," Marcus decided. "We're going to prove that Thompson Vasquez Restoration represents a new standard of excellence." The next 2 weeks were spent preparing for the CUDA's arrival. Marcus researched every aspect of the car's specifications, contacted suppliers for authentic replacement parts, and developed a detailed restoration plan that addressed every component of the vehicle. Elena handled the administrative details with her usual efficiency, but Marcus noticed increased attention to documentation and quality control procedures. She was clearly determined to avoid any repetition of past problems. Jake threw himself into learning about 1970 Plymouth products, studying factory service manuals and parts catalogs until he could identify components and specifications from memory. His enthusiasm was infectious, motivating both adults to maintain their own high standards. The CUDA arrived on a Wednesday morning aboard a specialized enclosed trailer. Marcus supervised the unloading process personally, ensuring that no additional damage occurred during transport. Even with the rear quarter panel damage, the car's presence was commanding. "She's beautiful," Jake said reverently as they pushed the convertible into its designated bay. Marcus began his detailed pre-restoration documentation, photographing every component from multiple angles and creating written records of all original parts and their conditions. This documentation would be crucial for both insurance purposes and historical preservation. The first phase of restoration involved careful disassembly, with each component cleaned, catalogued, and stored for eventual refinishing. Marcus worked methodically, treating every part as a valuable artifact worthy of preservation. Elena established a project management system that tracked progress daily, with photographs and written updates that would be shared with Blackwood weekly. She was determined to maintain complete transparency throughout the restoration process. "How's the metalwork looking?" Elena asked, as Marcus began assessing the quarter panel damage more closely. "Better than I expected. The impact stretched the metal but didn't tear it severely. I can save about 80% of the original panel through careful reshaping." "That's fantastic news. Blackwood will appreciate preserving as much original metal as possible." Marcus had developed a repair strategy that minimized replacement parts while ensuring structural integrity. The work would be time-consuming and require exceptional skill, but the results would be virtually undetectable. Jake had been assigned responsibility for cleaning and cataloging small components, hardware, trim pieces, and interior parts that would need refinishing. His attention to detail impressed both adults as he discovered manufacturing codes and assembly marks that provided insights into the car's production history. "Dad, look at this," Jake called out, holding up a piece of interior trim. The date. Code shows this was installed on March 15th, 1970. That means this car was built during the second week of Plymouth's CUDA convertible production. Marcus examined the date code Jake had found. "Excellent detective work, buddy. That kind of historical documentation adds value beyond the restoration itself." Elena had been photographing Jake's discoveries for inclusion in the project documentation. Blackwood would appreciate the historical research that accompanied the mechanical restoration. 2 weeks into the project, Blackwood made his first inspection visit. Marcus had prepared extensively, organizing work areas and preparing detailed explanations of each phase of restoration. "Mr. Thompson," Blackwood said as he examined the disassembled quarter panel, "this level of documentation exceeds anything I've seen from other shops. We believe that preservation of history requires understanding that history. Every component tells part of the car's story." Blackwood spent an hour reviewing Marcus's work, asking detailed questions about repair techniques and replacement parts. His examination was thorough, but revealed genuine interest rather than suspicion. "I'm impressed," he concluded. "The approach is exactly what this car deserves." Jake had been waiting patiently for his turn to present the historical research he'd compiled. When Blackwood finished examining the mechanical work, Jake stepped forward with his notebook. "Mr. Blackwood, would you like to see what I learned about your car's production history?" For the next 20 minutes, Jake presented his findings with the enthusiasm of a young historian. He'd traced the car's assembly sequence, identified its original dealer, and researched the specifications that made Cuda convertibles so rare. Blackwood listened with growing amazement. "Young man, you know more about this car than I do, and I've owned it for 15 years. Knowledge is respect," Jake replied, echoing something he'd heard his father say countless times. "Indeed it is. You're going to make an exceptional craftsman." Someday, as Blackwood prepared to leave, he pulled Elena aside for a private conversation. Marcus couldn't hear their discussion, but Elena's expression grew increasingly surprised as they talked. "What was that about?" Marcus asked, after Blackwood left. Elena was holding a business card and looked somewhat stunned. "He wants to discuss having us manage his entire collection, not just restoration, acquisition, maintenance, documentation, everything." "What would that mean?" "It would mean we'd become one of the most important restoration facilities in the country. It would also mean taking on responsibilities we've never imagined." Marcus looked around their shop, filled with projects representing dreams and histories, staffed by a 12-year-old apprentice and 2 adults learning to trust each other's expertise. "One project at a time," he said finally. "Let's prove we can handle the Cuda perfectly before we start planning to manage 43 cars." "Wise approach," Elena agreed. "But Marcus, this is really happening. We're not just fixing cars anymore. We're building something that could last for generations." That evening, as they closed the shop and headed upstairs to their apartment, Marcus reflected on how quickly their lives had transformed. 6 months ago, he'd been worried about paying rent and keeping food on the table. Now, he was discussing business relationships that could secure their future for decades. Jake fell asleep at the kitchen table while studying carburetor diagrams, his head pillowed on his notebook. Marcus carried his son to bed, then stood at the window overlooking the shop floor, where millions of dollars in automotive history waited for their careful attention. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and greater responsibilities. But tonight, Marcus felt grateful for the journey that had brought them to this point and confident in their ability to handle whatever came next. The crisis hit on a Tuesday morning in October, 3 months into the Cuda restoration. Marcus arrived at the shop to find water dripping through the ceiling directly above Blackwood's convertible. During the night, a water heater in the upstairs apartment had failed catastrophically, flooding their living space and threatening everything below. "Dad, our stuff is floating!" Jake called out as he ran down from the apartment, his shoes squelching with each step. Marcus grabbed protective covers and rushed to shield the Cuda from the continuing drips. The car's partially restored body was vulnerable to water damage that could set the project back months and potentially cost tens of thousands in repairs. Elena arrived 20 minutes later to find Marcus and Jake frantically moving equipment and covering vehicles. The main service bay had become a maze of tarps and buckets, catching water from multiple ceiling leaks. "How bad is it upstairs?" she asked, pulling on work gloves to help with the emergency response. "Everything's soaked," Jake reported. "My baseball cards, Dad's tools, all our clothes. The water went everywhere." Elena immediately took charge of damage control, calling emergency restoration services, while Marcus focused on protecting their most valuable projects. Within an hour, they had industrial dehumidifiers running and crews working to extract water from the apartment. "The good news is that none of the cars were damaged," Marcus reported after a thorough inspection. "The bad news is that we're effectively homeless, and the shop's electrical system needs complete inspection before we can resume work." The restoration crew estimated 3 weeks for repairs and water damage remediation. 3 weeks when they couldn't work on customer projects, couldn't generate revenue, and couldn't meet the deadlines they'd promised. Elena sat in the office trailer the restoration company had brought, calculating the financial impact. "Insurance will cover the physical damage, but not the lost revenue or schedule delays. We're looking at roughly $40,000 in costs we can't recover." Marcus felt the familiar knot of anxiety he'd thought was behind him. 3 months of success had made him forget how quickly circumstances could change, how thin the margin between prosperity and disaster really was. "What do we tell our customers?" Jake asked, voicing the question that was keeping Marcus awake. "At night, we tell them the truth," Elena said firmly. "Emergencies happen. Real customers will understand, and customers who don't understand aren't the ones we want anyway." Elena's confidence was reassuring, but Marcus knew that Harrison Blackwood's reaction would determine their future reputation. A 3-week delay on $1 million restoration could easily become the kind of story that followed them for years. The conversation with Blackwood took place that afternoon at his warehouse. Marcus had prepared extensively, bringing documentation, showing exactly where they stood in the restoration process, and detailed plans for completing the work once normal operations resumed. "A water heater failure?" Blackwood asked, his expression unreadable. "Catastrophic failure of a 20-year-old unit that had been inspected and certified safe just 6 months ago," Elena explained. "Our insurance company has confirmed that it was an unforeseeable equipment failure." Marcus watched Blackwood's face, trying to gauge his reaction. This was exactly the kind of problem that had damaged Elena's grandfather's reputation 30 years earlier. "What's your revised timeline?" Blackwood asked finally. "The delay adds 3 weeks to our schedule, putting completion at late January." "Instead of early January," Marcus replied, "but we're prepared to work overtime once operations resume to minimize the impact." Blackwood walked over to a display case containing photographs of his father working on various restoration projects. He studied the images in silence for several minutes, while Marcus and Elena waited nervously. 47 years ago, my father taught me that character is revealed not by how people handle success, but by how they handle unexpected problems." Blackwood said finally, "You didn't cause this situation, and you're taking responsibility for managing it professionally." Marcus felt relief wash over him. "We appreciate your understanding. However," Blackwood continued, "I have a proposition that might benefit us both." Elena leaned forward. "What kind of proposition?" "I have a climate-controlled restoration facility at my ranch in Cave Creek that's currently empty. My previous restoration team used it before they became too busy for my projects. You could complete the CUDA there and continue working on other projects without delay." Marcus stared at him in surprise. "You'd let us use your facility? Consider it a trial run. If the arrangement works well, we could discuss making it permanent. I've been thinking about establishing an in-house restoration operation for some time." The implications were staggering. Working at Blackwood's facility would provide access to equipment and resources that could take years to acquire otherwise. It would also demonstrate trust that could open doors throughout the collector community. What would be the terms? Elena asked carefully. No cost for facility use during the emergency period. After that, we negotiate a lease arrangement that benefits both parties. You get access to professional-grade equipment. I get proximity to my projects and quality control I can't achieve with outside contractors. Jake had been listening to this conversation with wide eyes. Does that mean we'd get to work around all those amazing cars every day? Blackwood smiled at Jake's enthusiasm. It means you'd be working in the middle of automotive history, young man. I think you'd find it educational. The tour of Blackwood's restoration facility the next day exceeded Marcus's wildest expectations. The building was a purpose-built restoration shop with every piece of equipment he'd ever dreamed of owning. Paint booths with controlled environments that rivaled factory specifications. Hydraulic lifts capable of handling everything from motorcycles to vintage trucks. A parts cleaning system that could restore components to better-than-new condition. This is incredible, Elena whispered as they walked through the machine shop area. Some of this equipment costs more than our entire current setup. Jake had found the diagnostic equipment and was studying a computerized engine analyzer that could test vintage carburetors and ignition systems with laboratory precision. Mr. Blackwood, this machine can measure carburetor flow rates down to individual circuits, Jake observed. That's way more accurate than the vacuum gauges we use. Very good eye. That analyzer costs $60,000, but it ensures that every engine leaving this shop performs exactly as the factory intended. Marcus was overwhelmed by the scope of resources available. With equipment like this, they could handle restorations that required capabilities far beyond what their current shop could provide. The previous restoration team left behind a complete parts inventory, Blackwood explained, showing them storage areas filled with new old stock components. Carburetors, ignition systems, trim pieces, everything organized by manufacturer and model year. Elena examined the parts inventory with growing amazement. This represents hundreds of thousands of dollars in vintage components. My father started collecting parts in the 1960s when they were still available from dealers. I've continued adding to the collection ever since. The right part at the right time can make the difference between a good restoration and a perfect one. The living quarters attached to the facility were as impressive as the shop itself. A modern apartment with 3 bedrooms, office space, and windows overlooking the Sonoran Desert. Jake immediately claimed the bedroom with built-in bookcases and a view of the parts storage warehouse. Dad, I could learn about cars all day and never run out of new stuff to study, Jake said, his excitement evident. Marcus understood his son's enthusiasm, but he was also aware of how dramatically this arrangement would change their lives. Moving to Blackwood's facility would provide opportunities they'd never imagined, but it would also make them dependent on his continued goodwill. Harrison, this is incredibly generous, but I need to understand the long-term implications, Marcus said during their private discussion. What happens if our working relationship doesn't develop as expected? Then you return to your original facility with experience and connections that will benefit you for years, Blackwood replied. Marcus, I'm not trying to control your business. I'm trying to create a situation where we both get what we need, which is, you need resources and opportunities to build the reputation you deserve. I need craftsmen I can trust with cars that represent my life's passion. This arrangement serves both purposes. Elena had been studying the financial projections that would result from working at Blackwood's facility. Access to superior equipment would allow them to take on projects they couldn't handle previously, while proximity to Blackwood's collection would provide steady revenue from maintenance and minor restoration work. The numbers work, she told Marcus privately. We could increase our revenue by 40% while actually reducing our operating expenses. And the risks. We become dependent on Harrison's goodwill. If he changes his mind about the arrangement, we'd have to rebuild everything from scratch. Marcus weighed the options carefully. The safe choice was to wait 3 weeks for their original facility to be repaired, then continue growing gradually. The bold choice was to accept Blackwood's offer and potentially accelerate their development by years. "What does your gut tell you?" Elena asked. "My gut tells me that opportunities like this don't come along twice, but my head tells me that we've got a good thing going and shouldn't risk it unnecessarily." Jake had been working on homework at a nearby table but looked up when he heard his name mentioned in their conversation. "Dad, remember what you always say about taking calculated risks?" "What's that, buddy?" "You can't steal second base if you keep one foot on first." Marcus smiled at his son's application of baseball wisdom to business decisions. "You think we should take the risk? I think we should trust Miss Elena's numbers and Mr. Blackwood's character. He could have been mean about the water damage, but he tried to help instead." Elena nodded approvingly. "Jake's got excellent instincts about people." The decision to move their operation to Blackwood's facility was made that evening over pizza, in a hotel room near their damaged shop. They would transfer all current projects, establish temporary residence in the ranch apartment, and begin what amounted to a completely new phase of their business development. "Are you sure about this?" Marcus asked Elena as they finalized the logistics. "I'm sure that standing still is the biggest risk we could take. The restoration industry is changing rapidly, and shops that don't adapt get left behind." The move took place over a weekend, with Blackwood providing trucks and crew to transport their equipment and projects safely. Marcus watched Dr. Williams' Boss Mustang being loaded onto a specialized trailer, trusting that they were making the right decision for their customers as well as themselves. Jake supervised the transfer of his personal workspace with the intensity of a military logistics coordinator. Every tool had its designated location, every reference manual was catalogued and properly stored. "This is like moving to car heaven," Jake observed as they settled into their new environment. Marcus had to agree. Walking through Blackwood's collection, on their first morning of operations, surrounded by automotive perfection and equipped with resources he'd never expected to access, he felt both grateful and slightly overwhelmed. "Elena, what if we can't live up to this opportunity? Then we'll fail spectacularly while attempting something great instead of succeeding modestly while playing it safe," she replied. "I've done modest success. It's not nearly as satisfying as you'd think." The first week at Blackwood's facility established new rhythms and higher standards. With superior equipment and ideal working conditions, Marcus found himself able to accomplish more in a day than he'd previously managed in a week. The CUDA restoration progressed rapidly, with metalwork precision that exceeded anything Marcus had achieved previously. Jake's learning accelerated as well, with access to diagnostic equipment that made complex systems understandable and manageable. "Dad, using this paint booth is like the difference between drawing with crayons and painting with professional brushes," Jake observed after watching Marcus apply primer coats with factory-level precision. Elena had established an office area where she managed both current projects and the growing list of potential customers who'd heard about their new arrangement. Word was spreading through the collector community that Thompson Vasquez Restoration had access to resources that rivaled the industry's largest operations. "We've got 3 new project inquiries this week," Elena reported during their Friday planning session. "All high-end restorations, all customers who specifically mentioned our association with Harrison Blackwood." Marcus realized that their temporary solution to a water damage crisis had become the foundation for opportunities they couldn't have imagined 6 months earlier. Sometimes, he reflected, the best decisions were the ones that initially felt like the biggest risks. That weekend, as Jake explored the parts warehouse like a treasure hunter and Elena planned their expanded marketing strategy, Marcus stood in the paint booth applying final color coats to the CUDA's repaired quarter panel. The work was proceeding flawlessly. The color match was perfect, and the finish quality exceeded even Blackwood's exacting standards. For the first time since the water crisis began, Marcus allowed himself to believe that everything was going to work out better than they'd originally planned. The completion of Harrison Blackwood's CUDA restoration in February marked more than just the end of a successful project. It represented a transformation that Marcus was still learning to comprehend. As he applied the final protective coating to the car's flawless in-violet paint, he reflected on how far they'd traveled from that rainy midnight encounter 8 months earlier. Jake had grown 3 inches and gained confidence that showed in every aspect of his work. The 12-year-old who once struggled to reach workbenches now operated diagnostic equipment with the competence of a seasoned technician. His understanding of automotive systems had evolved from enthusiastic curiosity to genuine expertise. "Dad, the final inspection is scheduled for tomorrow morning," Jake announced, consulting the project management system he'd helped Elena develop. "Mr. Blackwood wants to drive the car before the official handover." Marcus nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and nervous anticipation. The CUDA represented their highest profile work to date, and Blackwood's reaction would influence their reputation throughout the collector community. Elena emerged from the office area with a stack of documentation that would accompany the completed restoration. 500 pages of photographs, receipts, specification sheets, and historical research. "This is the most comprehensive restoration record I've ever compiled." The presentation took place in Blackwood's private garage, with the restored CUDA positioned under perfect lighting that revealed every detail of their work. Marcus had spent the previous evening conducting final adjustments, ensuring that every system functioned exactly as Plymouth had intended in 1970. Blackwood approached the car with the reverence of someone examining a religious artifact. His inspection was methodical and thorough, examining paint thickness with electronic gauges, checking panel gaps with precision measuring tools, and studying engine bay details under magnification. "The metalwork is flawless," he said finally, running his hand along the repaired quarter panel. "I can't detect any trace of the damage or repair." Jake stepped forward with his documentation notebook. "Mr. Blackwood, would you like to see the historical research we compiled during the restoration?" For the next 30 minutes, Jake presented findings that traced the car's production sequence, identified its original dealer destination, and documented every aspect of its mechanical specifications. His presentation demonstrated not just knowledge, but genuine passion for automotive history. "Young man, this level of research exceeds what most museums achieve," Blackwood said with obvious admiration. "You've documented details about this car that I never knew existed." Marcus watched with paternal pride as his son explained complex technical concepts with clarity and enthusiasm. Jake had found his calling in the intersection of mechanical skill and historical preservation. "Now comes the real test," Blackwood announced, producing the car's keys. "Let's see how she drives." The 440 six-pack engine fired immediately, settling into the distinctive idle that marked properly tuned triple carburation. Marcus had spent weeks perfecting the engine's performance, ensuring that it delivered both the power and drivability that made these cars legendary. Blackwood drove for 20 minutes through the desert roads surrounding his ranch, testing acceleration, braking, and handling characteristics. When he returned, his expression revealed complete satisfaction. "Gentlemen, this restoration exceeds my highest expectations. The car drives exactly as it did when my father and I first discussed working on it together." Elena stepped forward with the final paperwork. "Harrison, there's something else we need to discuss." Marcus looked at her with surprise. They'd completed the project perfectly on the revised schedule and within budget. What else could possibly need discussion? I've been thinking about your offer to manage your entire collection, Elena continued. We're ready to take on that responsibility. Blackwood's eyebrows rose slightly. That's a significant commitment. Are you certain you're prepared for that level of responsibility? We've proven ourselves with your most emotionally significant project. The systems we've developed for documentation, quality control, and project management can scale to handle your entire collection, Marcus realized. That Elena had been planning this moment for months, using the CUDA restoration as demonstration of their capabilities. The systematic approach, the comprehensive documentation, the attention to historical accuracy, everything had been building toward this conversation. What would you propose? Blackwood asked. Elena produced another set of documents. Thompson Vasquez, Collection Management Services. We handle acquisition, restoration, maintenance, documentation, and insurance coordination for your entire collection. You retain ownership of everything, but we become your exclusive automotive team. The proposal was comprehensive and ambitious. Marcus scanned the financial projections and felt his head spin. The revenue potential was enormous, but so were the responsibilities. This would make us one of the largest restoration operations in the Southwest, Marcus observed. It would make us much more than that, Elena replied. It would establish us as specialists in the highest levels of collector car management. Jake had been listening to this discussion with growing excitement. Dad, does this mean we'd get to work on all those amazing cars in Mr. Blackwood's warehouse? It means we'd be responsible for preserving automotive history at its finest level, Elena answered. Every car in Harrison's collection represents the pinnacle of American automotive achievement. Blackwood studied the proposal documents with the same attention he'd given to the CUDA's restoration details. This arrangement would require complete trust on my part. These cars represent 43 years of collecting and millions of dollars in value, which is exactly why we've spent 8 months proving ourselves worthy of that trust, Elena replied confidently. Marcus found himself impressed by Elena's strategic thinking. She'd used their successful partnership and proven results to position them for opportunities that would have been impossible to achieve independently. There's one more thing, Elena said, her voice carrying a note of nervousness that Marcus hadn't heard before. I need to tell you both something about my background that I haven't shared completely. Marcus felt a familiar knot of anxiety. Elena's revelations had a tendency to change everything dramatically. When I told you about inheriting my grandfather's business, I didn't mention the full scope of what that inheritance included. The restoration shop was just one part of a larger operation. She paused, seeming to gather courage for whatever she was about to reveal. I inherited the largest private collection of automotive documentation and historical records in the United States. Service manuals, parts catalogs, production records, dealer promotional materials, everything needed to authenticate and restore virtually any American car built between 1955 and 1975. Marcus stared at her. How large are we talking about? 47,000 documents catalogued and digitized. The collection includes materials that the manufacturers themselves no longer possess. Blackwood's expression had shifted to intense interest. Miss Vasquez, documentation like that is invaluable for concours-level restorations. Why haven't you mentioned this before? Because I've been focused on proving that we could deliver quality work without relying on unique resources. I wanted a reputation to be built on skill and integrity, not just access to rare documentation. Jake had stopped taking notes and was staring at Elena with obvious amazement. Miss Elena, you own the most important car research library in the country. I own what my grandfather spent 50 years collecting, plus everything I've added since. Inheriting it Combined with Harrison's collection and our restoration capabilities, we could create something unprecedented. The implications were staggering. With Elena's documentation, Blackwood's cars, and Marcus's craftsmanship, they could establish themselves as the definitive authority on American muscle car restoration. "Elena, why are you revealing this now?" Marcus asked. "Because I trust you, both completely and because I think we're ready to build something bigger than any of us could achieve individually." Blackwood had been studying Elena's documentation proposal with growing excitement. "Miss Vasquez, with resources like these, we could establish a research center that would serve the entire collector community. That's exactly what I'm proposing. Thompson Vasquez Automotive Research and Restoration. We preserve history through both mechanical restoration and historical documentation." Marcus felt overwhelmed by the scope of what Elena was suggesting. 6 months ago, he'd been worried about paying rent. Now she was proposing they create an institution that would influence the collector car hobby for generations. "What would this mean for Jake and me?" Marcus asked. "It would mean Jake grows up surrounded by automotive history and learns skills that will serve him for life, regardless of what career he eventually chooses. It would mean you become one of the most respected restoration craftsmen in the country." Jake had been unusually quiet during these revelations, but now he spoke up. "Dad, remember what you told me about dreams being things you work toward, not things you just wish for." "I remember. This isn't just wishing anymore. This is all the work we've been doing leading to something amazing." Marcus looked at his son, amazed by the wisdom that seemed to come naturally to him. Jake was right. They hadn't stumbled into this opportunity. They'd earned it through months of careful work and proven competence. "Harrison, what's your reaction to Elena's proposal?" Marcus asked. Blackwood had been quiet for several minutes, studying both the documentation and the people, who had just offered to transform his hobby into something approaching a mission. "I think my father would have loved this idea," he said finally. "He always believed that these cars deserved better than just being stored and occasionally displayed. He wanted them to be studied, understood, and preserved for future generations." "Is that a yes?" Elena asked. "That's a yes to establishing the research center, a yes to the collection management arrangement, and a yes to creating something that will outlive all of us." The celebration that followed was subdued but deeply satisfying. They'd achieved something that none of them could have imagined when Marcus first stopped to help a stranded motorist on a rainy night. Jake insisted on documenting the moment with photographs, understanding instinctively that they were witnessing the birth of something historically significant. "Dad, can I ask you something?" Jake said as they walked through Blackwood's collection later that evening. "Of course, buddy. Are you happy?" Marcus considered the question seriously. 8 months ago, happiness had seemed like a luxury he couldn't afford. Now surrounded by automotive perfection and working alongside people he respected and trusted, happiness felt like the natural result of meaningful work. "I'm very happy, Jake. Are you?" "I'm happy, but I'm also excited about learning everything I can about these cars and this business. I want to be as good at this as you are. You're already better at some things than I am. Your research skills and attention to detail are exceptional." Elena joined them beside a pristine 1970 Chevelle SS LS6. "What are you two discussing so seriously?" "Jake was asking if I'm happy," Marcus replied. "And what did you tell him?" "That happiness is what happens when you find work that matters and people who share your values." Elena smiled. "Your grandfather would have liked that philosophy, Jake. He believed that the best work comes from the heart, not just the hands." 3 months later, Thompson Vasquez Automotive Research and Restoration officially opened to the public. The grand opening event attracted collectors, historians, and automotive journalists from across the country. Marcus stood in the main restoration bay, watching Jake explain carburetor rebuilding techniques to a group of teenage visitors. His son had grown into his role as the facility's youngest expert, combining technical knowledge with natural teaching ability. Elena had established the research center as a separate wing of the facility, where scholars and enthusiasts could access documentation that existed nowhere else. The combination of restoration services and historical research was attracting attention from museums and universities. "Any regrets?" Elena asked, joining Marcus as they watched Jake's impromptu educational session. "Only that it took me so long. To learn that taking risks with the right people leads to rewards you can't achieve alone." "What about you, Jake?" Elena called him. "Any regrets about leaving the storage unit garage behind?" Jake looked up from the carburetor he was demonstrating. "Miss Elena, you can't regret the past when the future is this exciting." As the celebration continued around them, Marcus reflected on the chain of events that had brought them to this point. A broken-down Mustang on a rainy night had led to opportunities that exceeded his wildest dreams. But more importantly, it had led to relationships built on mutual respect, shared values, and commitment to excellence. The three of them had created something bigger than a business. They'd created a legacy that would preserve automotive history, while teaching the next generation to value craftsmanship and integrity. Standing in their state-of-the-art facility, surrounded by automotive treasures, and watching his son teach others about the work they all loved, Marcus understood that some stories don't end. They just transform into new beginnings. Jake looked up from his demonstration and caught his father's eye. "Dad, what's next?" Marcus smiled. "Whatever comes next, buddy, we'll handle it together." And in that moment, surrounded by the fruits of honest work and meaningful relationships, Marcus Thompson knew that whatever challenges the future might bring, they were ready. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.